Okay, let's jump in. We've done deep dives on, everything from supply chains to architectural history. But today, the sources we've pulled together really pivot to the human element. We're talking about the makers. And specifically this devastating but universal idea that everything they create is, in the end, temporary.
Right. It's the ultimate creative conflict, isn't it? We've got these intense, sometimes contradictory stories of 7 different people: a violin maker, an urban farmer, a surgeon, a game designer,
The forger, a midwife.
and a demolition engineer. And they all face this one huge question. Why pour your life, your entire being, into making something if it's just going to disappear?
Exactly. That devotion to the ephemeral, that's what's driving this whole deep dive. The sources are really exploring that space between creation and, well, persistence.
So our mission today is to unpack what they call the maker's paradox, which is this idea that creation actually requires destruction, that survival demands some kind of deep compromise.
And that a maker's true legacy isn't permanence at all. It's transformation. It's lineage.
Yeah, and that often means you have to sacrifice the thing itself to save the knowledge behind it. Let's start with Sarah, the violin maker.
Right. Sarah. She works in Cremona, Italy. So
Okay.
the absolute birthplace of the great violin masters. Her craft is just the definition of what the sources call embodied knowledge. She's working with this 300-year-old alpine spruce, and she's thinning the plates.
The graduation process.
Right, graduation. But she's not using calipers or digital gauges. She's using her thumb. She's listening to the wood as she taps it. The source literally says she listens as the wood speaks.
And what's so critical to understand here is that this knowledge, the secret to a Stradivarius sound, it's not written down. It is entirely in her fingertips. It's muscle memory.
It's instinct.
It's instinct, which is why her diagnosis, severe aggressive rheumatoid arthritis, is just a complete catastrophe for her work. She's not just losing her job. It's like a whole library of knowledge is about to be burned down inside her own body.
A knowledge extinction event. And her reaction is just pure defiance. She rejects the advice to rest. She quotes her old mentor saying, "I'd rather wear out than rust out." So she starts carving what she thinks might be her last violin. And she's pushing the boundaries, graduating the basside thinner than anyone would dare, trying to get this dark, complex tone she'd always been afraid to try for.
It's a race against her own body unmaking itself. And this leads her to Dr. Chen Wei, the surgeon she sees about joint replacement.
And Chen, he just lays out the compromise so starkly. He tells her, look, the surgery could buy you maybe 2 more years of function.
Function, but not feel.
Exactly. Those prosthetic joints, they don't have the microvibrational feedback of real bone and cartilage. Her entire craft depends on feeling those vibrations through her own bones.
So the new hands would force her to rely on, calculation? On knowledge from her head instead of the knowing that's in her hands. It changes everything.
But this is where it gets really layered, because Chen, the guy who's offering the fix, he's having his own crisis of faith.
Yeah, he's this incredible surgeon, does liver transplants, these incredibly complex things, but he's dealing with a tiny tremor and this professional doubt. He sees his own work, surgery, not as creation, but as controlled violence.
Wow.
Yeah. He thinks making things in flesh is just hubris, just trying to stop an inevitable decay for a little while.
So he's on the complete opposite side of the paradox.
Totally. He tells Sarah that if it were him, he'd rather make perfectly while I can than stop than make adequately forever. He's choosing purity. He's choosing a clean ending over a compromised continuation.
But Sarah,
Yeah.
she makes the opposite choice, the heartbreaking choice. She goes for the surgery. She accepts that her hands will be, in her words, functional but not feeling.
She trades excellence for continuation.
She does, and Jen performs the surgery perfectly.
Yeah.
But the result is you have these working hands that no longer know. She saved the action, but she had to sacrifice the deep embodied knowledge to do it.
So if you bring it back to the paradox, she allowed the destruction of her sensory self to keep the craft, the act of making, alive. She became a vessel, even if her connection to what's inside the vessel changed forever.
That choice, compromising purity, just to continue, it perfectly sets the stage for our next couple of makers. They're up against entire systems that want to unmake everything they've built.
Let's go to Detroit, to James the urban farmer.
James's mission was just...
Yeah.
It was so radical, he wanted to take a contaminated former factory parking lot, what the sources call poison ground, and turn it into a garden.
And not just with new soil. The method itself was a form of resistance. He used something called mycoremediation.
Who do you
for
say?
fungi, oyster mushrooms, specifically, to literally eat and sequester heavy metals, lead, cadmium out of the soil. He was transforming death into life biologically. You could smell the lot changing from metallic asphalt to rich, damp earth.
And it works. He gets 3 years of abundance out of it, feeding 40 families. But then the inevitable happens.
Eminent domain. The land is seized for a new luxury housing development.
And the sources are really clear on this. He knows he's going to lose. He can't fight that kind of capital. But he keeps fighting anyway.
Because, and this is the quote that just sticks with you, losing quietly is worse than losing loudly.
Yes. His final act of defiance is just incredible. After the bulldozers come and turn 3 years of life back into rubble, he goes back that night. He reaches into his bag and he plants one single stubborn seedling. A resistance tomato right there in the dust and the pulverized concrete.
So his persistence isn't the garden. The garden is gone. It's destroyed.
Right.
It's in the seeds he saved. It's in the knowledge of the mushroom remediation that he passed on to his apprentice, Marcus. The physical thing died, but the act, the knowledge, it transformed and it spread.
That idea of knowledge being decentralized and the fight against a legal system, it leads us straight to Ruth, the traditional midwife in Kentucky.
And Ruth's knowledge, just like Sarah's, is embodied. She's a fourth-generation midwife. It wasn't learned from a textbook. It's passed down through touch, through intuition.
But the state won't certify it. They deem her practice illegal. She's facing a suspended prison sentence if she doesn't stop.
And she realizes that this knowledge, this holistic knowledge, you can't just break it up into little pieces and teach it to certified nurses. It has to be lived, whole, or the entire tradition just dies with her.
Which raises this huge ethical question, right? If the knowledge that saves lives is illegal, is the law itself the thing that's actually destructive? And she faces this ultimate choice when a woman, Sarah Morrison, goes into a really fast labor. Does she honor her probation, or does she risk prison to catch this baby safely?
And she catches the baby. It turns out to be her own grandchild. And she argues in court, the sources document this, she says she is choosing life over law. The price for her knowledge to persist is her own freedom.
She does end up dying in prison after continuing to practice in secret. But her knowledge survives in 2 really interesting ways.
First, a filmmaker, Amanda, documents her, archives the knowledge visually, so the record of the tradition survives.
And second,
She secretly trains her daughter-in-law, Jessica. So the lineage continues, just underground now. The maker sacrifices herself, but the tradition transforms to survive. It shifts from public to secret.
so we've seen makers compromise their body, their freedom. Now let's talk about Mika, the game designer, who's facing a compromise of her identity, her integrity.
Mika lives this completely split life. By night, she makes these free, uncompromising, really raw art games about grief. They're based on the trauma of losing her brother.
Right, her game Witness, it forces you to just witness helplessly. There's no winning, no resolution.
But by day, to pay the bills, she works at a big corporate studio. She designs mobile games that are all about monetization, player retention, engagement metrics.
The opposite of art.
The profane subsidizing the sacred. It's a compromise for survival. But the crisis hits when that corporate studio asks her to design a gentle, monetized game about grief called Grief Gardens.
Oh.
Yeah. They essentially want to turn her personal tragedy into a corporate asset. And she just struggles with this question of whether making grief manageable and profitable betrays the actual raw truth of it.
That's the core paradox for any artist, isn't it? To reach more people, do you have to water down the message?
Right. But Mika, she draws a line in the sand.
Yeah.
She refuses to sell her personal art game, Witness, to the corporation. She chooses the purity of her personal work over a much bigger reach.
She decides to maintain that split existence, that fence between her corporate craft and her artistic calling.
And if Mika compromised her reach to maintain her integrity, our next maker, Aaron the Forger, takes ethical compromise to an absolute extreme.
This story is wild. Aaron commits federal crimes. He creates perfect counterfeit documents, passports, citizenship papers to save refugees.
He's using the identities of deceased children to give paper existence to living refugees. He's fixing what he sees as the total failure of legal systems to protect human life.
And what's fascinating is how the sources frame his ethics. He calls his own creations illegal documents that should be legal documents.
Yeah, he fully believes his criminal act is more ethical than legal denial. He's saying the destruction caused by the bureaucracy is so much greater than the destruction caused by his crime.
And that forces you to confront this really uncomfortable question. How do you weigh the ethical cost of, say, using a dead child's identity against saving a living family?
He just lives in that paradox. And he keeps making, knowing he'll almost certainly be arrested eventually, because he's part of this larger hidden network of makers who all believe their work is necessary when the official systems fail.
And that idea of necessary destruction or unmaking, it brings us to our final maker, Yuki.
Yuki, the demolition engineer. And she just gives us the clearest picture of this partnership between making and unmaking.
She doesn't see herself as a destroyer. She calls herself the architect of ending, a tender destroyer. She loves buildings, but her job is to kill them cleanly, to make space for the next thing.
And she has this deep respect for the creative process. There's this amazing story about the Nakamura Tower demolition. She found out that Mika's small game studio was still inside, and they needed 2 more weeks to finish their game.
And she delayed the whole multi-million-dollar project.
Just for them. Because she believed that making should finish before unmaking begins. She honors that creative moment.
And her own cycle comes full circle when she has to demolish the very first building she ever designed as an architect. Making and unmaking are both hers, as the source puts it.
But it's her ritual that really shows the paradox in action. For every single building she demolishes, she first builds a perfect miniature model of it.
So the real building becomes dust, total unmaking. But its memory persists in her meticulously crafted representation. She creates a monument to the absence she caused.
The destruction of the object literally fuels the persistence of its memory.
Okay, so this is the moment where the deep dive really ties everything together for you. Because the sources show how these 7 isolated lives, they were all connected, they didn't know each other, but their work interlocked.
It's incredible, Sarah's last violin. It was played at a small concert in James's garden, just weeks before the bulldozers came.
No way.
Yeah, and Aaron's forged papers helped a family escape persecution, and that same family, when they got to Kentucky, ended up needing Ruth's illegal midwifery care.
And there's more. Chen, the surgeon who operated on Sarah's hands, he ended up hiring James, the farmer's daughter, Keisha.
And Keisha becomes a surgeon who works with Jen, and she's constantly telling him that what her father did, making gardens from poison ground, is exactly the same as surgery. It's making new life and function from broken material.
So they were never really alone. They were all part of this single interconnected web of human persistence.
Exactly.
So what's the core insight here? What does this all mean for you, the listener, when you take it all in?
I think the biggest takeaway from the maker's paradox is this. The maker's true legacy is never the object. The violin breaks, the garden is bulldozed, the body eventually fails.
The legacy is the knowledge that gets passed on, the transformed lineage, the continuation of the act itself. Sarah's knowledge is in her apprentices. James's resistance is in those seeds. Ruth's craft is in her daughter-in-law and in that documentary film.
They're not the destination. They're a link in the chain. A vessel for the knowledge to keep going, even if it changes form.
So if you're out there making anything, writing code, building a business, raising a family, persistence isn't about defending that one thing forever.
No, it's about accepting that your work is temporary and focusing on the transformation you enable, the knowledge you pass on. That's the part that actually endures.
And it brings us right back to that mutual sacrifice. The makers spend their lives creating, but the process wears them down. Sarah's joints, Ruth's freedom, Mika's peace of mind.
And the sources end with this really profound, kind of beautiful and universal thought. It says, we spend our lives making things that unmake us. And in the unmaking, we make something that doesn't end.
Something that transforms and persists long after we're gone. Think about that as you find your own link in that chain this week. Thanks for joining the Deep Dive.